Okay, so we have heard now just a bit how machine translation works. So we see why data is important for statistical machine translation systems. Simply because machine translation systems learn from existing data. So in a way, the more data we have, the better. But the question is, what is data? What kind of data do we need in ELRC? How could you help? What are we actually looking for? So first of all, for ELRC, we look for data in all EU languages and languages of CEF-affiliated countries. And well, almost anything which you have as data is valuable to us, anything. But to have an understanding of what this is, we would need to have a short understanding how language resources are actually produced. So how do we come from general documents data to language resources which can be used by machine translation systems? And to give you a short idea, I want to make this presentation for you. So first of all, what counts as data for machine translation? This is anything, really almost anything that contains words. Of course, we have a preference for sentences, even for sentences expressed in multiple languages, as you can find in reports, in speeches from your ministries, from your organizations, even contents on the web pages, brochures. In Germany, what we did, we had a short look around just on the internet to see what is already there, what might be freely available. And we found, yes, there are already quite a number of documents available, but they are only the tip of the iceberg, because internal information like you have for your everyday communication, for your everyday business, this is really what we need, and what is maybe 90% of all data, which could then be fed into the CEF AT. But we don't just need texts and speeches and reports. In many cases, it's also helpful to have what my colleague Khalid Shukri says, bag of words. So we need particular words in a particular language just to know the specific vocabulary, even in a particular domain, let's say in a medical domain, or in your case, what is relevant to you in everyday life, in everyday job life, how you need to translate things, what kind of words do you use in the target language, which would be Latvian in this case. So even collections of words, bags of words, are very helpful. I mentioned before regarding what types of data, of course, translations, they are great, but there are also some difficulties, let's say, involved in translations. Not for us, because we are happy to have one, but for the machine to be able to use it to infer about future translations. Let's just look at the book which I presented here. We have an example in English and in French. What we say in technical terms is we need lined translations. So that means, well, just in pictures expressed, that one unit corresponds to another unit in the target language. And I can give you an example of where this could happen. Here's a text from the Bible. Would that already count as an aligned translation? At least you can indicate which sentence corresponds to which other sentence, which fragment corresponds to which other fragment. But if you would look down or go into further detail, you would see that even in just normal translations, non-aligned translations, a sentence can vary, it can be split, especially, for instance, in my language, which is German, sentences, they can take lines and lines and lines, while in English, you would just have different sentences. So there's already a problem, and it's a complexity that you somehow need to handle. You need to give some indication, some help to the machine just to be able to deal with it. So this is just one thing, text translations. The other thing which I mentioned is important is really dictionaries, terminologies, ontologies, bags of words, just to understand how your particular domain is expressed. So these two things are more or less the cornerstones of what we would need. So then the next question. So now we know approximately what we need, what we look for, but we live in a digital world. Machines, they learn in a way from electronic data. So what kind of data formats would we be looking for? What is more preferable? What is not so helpful? Well, the good news is that actually most data formats, they are helpful to us, but particularly useful are, of course, translation memories, TMX files, XML translation files, plain texts, even Word open office documents as opposed to PDFs or the original PowerPoint presentations. For instance, in Germany, we found that our ministries, they hold a couple of thousand brochures, materials which are openly and publicly available, and they are translated in several languages. Of course, freely accessible on the internet, unfortunately only as PDF. So we started a search just to get hold of the original texts. It's a quest in itself, but such data is very, very useful for us. So just to really give you a more precise idea, because this was very, very high level, to get a better understanding for you what exactly we would expect, I would just draw your attention to the process, general process of how language resources are actually produced from data, the different steps involved in it, and how we would deal with whatever you could provide and make it usable for the machine translation system. So the first step is always to discover and identify the sources, then to clear IPR and get the data, accession legal issues which we will have a look at later, clean the data, make it usable for machine. There are a range of tools which my colleague Andrejs will probably give you a better understanding of in his presentation, documentation of the data, then the alignment of the translations when identified and breaking the texts into sentences, then compute the alignment confidence, and then finally share the data. So it's a lot to do, it's doable, but the basis is what you can provide to us. So, and with this, I would pass on to my colleague, to Andrejs. Thank you for continuing from here.
Labdien, vēlreiz. Tātad Andrea jau.
So hello once again. Andrea just now mentioned a number of steps, or the sequence, the logical sequence you have to go through in order to produce the raw data or input data that you need, or in other words, aligned texts or parallel texts that you need to create memory for the machine translation software. Let me again focus on some of these phases or stages. I mean, when working with bulky data, with large data volumes, and I suppose that most of you are working with many documents and quite big volumes of data, we need to structure the data, define the data, describe the data, and there are different methods and tools used for that, but the most popular around the world is one of the default specification, which is the Dublin metadata base, basically the metadata metadata that describes the particular language resource. And here you've got listed the Dublin core metadata elements set. Well, not all of these fields are really being defined in the case of each and every data unit. A lot of this information is entered automatically or inserted automatically, but that is necessary in order to archive and structure the information for further use. Now, that's one of the phases or steps. The next step is the processing of the data, or the production of those parallel text or aligned text, if you will, based on data. But first, before aligning, you need to get the data. Well, the easiest way to get the data is to align the Word documents containing simple sort of sentences or texts. Much more complicated cases when you don't have electronic sort of documents, electronic Word documents, when you need to scan those documents to get an electronic document, and you have to correct all the mistakes and process, which makes it, of course, very complicated and very expensive. And then there are also rich sources of data that are available online on demand. Let me give you just one of the examples, a domestic case. The State Tourism Development Agency and its web page is the example that I like to refer to. And you can find similar examples in other public sector web pages or the government web pages, websites. If you take a look at this website, you can see that it's available in a number of languages, English, German, Russian, on top of Latvian, of course, which sort of indicates that this might be a useful resource. But if you sort of dig down deeper, you see that you can't apply this data directly because, for example, the news in English are dated 14th August, at least the latest news, whereas in the case of Latvian language, the recent news are dated with October this year. So you must first understand which of the texts, paragraphs are to be aligned or where to start with creation of the parallel texts. You can find it in several of the websites section, for example, the function or the responsibility description that is available in Latvian. Very similar to the translation in English and German as well. So you can see that you can have a trilingual sort of text, and in Russian as well, so it's pretty similar. So you can use the extraction function. You can create a resource or data that can be then inserted or used in a machine translation tool or software, as has been described by Inguna a while ago. Here you can see aligned text in 3 languages, Latvian, German, English. However, most of the websites are not like this. Translations differ. Sentences are not also split the same way. I mean, there's one source language or source sentence to which it has several target sentences. And, you know, there are various tools for processing or for sort of filling those gaps in our consortium. One of our partners has a decent experience in developing, you know, methodology and software for automated analyses of those texts for a sort of a search engine that looks for the parallel text, and alignment tool is also integrated there. You know, there are several sort of steps that it goes through, but, you know, at a glimpse you can see how complicated the process is. But, you know, it is capable of having or performing quite a nice analysis of the text available online, not only from the web pages that you indicated in particular. It is capable of browsing more, you know, searching more links that are, for example, provided on these web pages. So it basically jumps and crawls through, you know, those links and sort of the web of those links and websites, and it can create sort of parallel corpora of parallel texts or text pairs that can then be used as a resource or data for the machine translation. Well, that's just one of the examples. I mean, one of the data sources. But as I already mentioned, web data is only the tip of the iceberg, as has been mentioned by previous speakers. A lot of data is being stored on the intranets, on the internal web or net of various institutions. Only 4% of the information held by institutions are publicly available. 96% are available in the so-called deep web that is protected by passwords, not accessible to the general public. And here I mean different databases, legal documents, scientific research information, or data for scientific purposes that is restricted access, and specific medical sort of records and medical information. A lot of this, that is below the tip of the iceberg, or that is below the water level, can become a very useful resource for the machine translation tools and their development. And most probably your institutions are in possession, own such resources, so you should have this internal debate on the ownership or the accessibility or access of this data. And probably this data could be used to create raw material for this machine translation infrastructure. And I would like to specifically stress the translation process. A lot of institutions procure the translation services or outsource the translation. And most professional translation agencies nowadays are using the so-called translation memory-based softwares or systems, or the information. I mean, all the documents that are being translated are being stored in translation memory, and if similar sentence occurs somewhere else in translation, then it is automatically translated. All professional translation agencies work that way. They have quite extensive translation databases or translation memories at their possession, an extremely valuable resource for a number of reasons. Firstly, because if you order similar translation or a translation of a similar document, an updated version of the same document, or a document on the same topic, probably most or part of this document has already been translated. That means that the costs go down for the translation of those new segments, sections, words, whatever units. Secondly, this resource is a wonderful, great resource, or wonderful source of raw data for machine translation systems. So, a practical advice to you, a cost-saving method. When you outsource a translation, when you hire a translation agency, do include in your contract a condition that they should also provide on top of the translation memory that you will be owning, that you will become an exclusive owner of. So that's a normal international practice. If you don't do that, please review your standard agreement terms and conditions and include this term or condition in them. And yes, well, you know how this works. Your folders contain a multitude of different documents and data, and each institution has its own ways of storing the data that is extracted from different sources, and our consortium is dealing with this issue as well. Our consortium also provides consulting advice, or basically can go into your institution and can audit your data systems and can suggest the best ways or the means for making the best use of this data in machine translation systems. As Ingun mentioned, the more data, the better the system works. So all in all, the system requires millions of sentences to be entered or inserted. But the good news is this sort of is very much like a human translator. So if you, for example, invite an interpreter to translate a particular event, he might be very good, very proficient in source and target language, but they might not be very good in terms of terminology. And much like in the case of this event, we gave the presentations to the interpreters in advance in order to allow them to study the terminology. That wasn't a sort of a big amount of data, but that was, this core terminology was necessary for the interpreter to make an appropriate or proper translation. And the same concerns machine translation. Why Google Translate is not good? Because it's meant for everything. I mean, translates, any kinds of text, but it's not suitable for the translation of LSP, the language for special purposes or specialized texts. And Hugo is very good for the public administration, so it's very good in terms of translating various government texts and government documents. So you can also, we can also tailor this tool to your needs by inserting the data provided by you, actually. So in conclusion, we'd like to remind you that the data your institution has is a value not only in itself, but also a very valuable sort of resource for the machine translation tools. We would like to encourage you to analyze, take a stock of the data and use it, and the more data you use, the better use you'll be able to make of the machine translation tools, and the more efficiently you'll be able to overcome language barriers and strengthen the positions of the language. Thank you.